Many years ago today, there were racial fireworks in and out of a Reno, Nevada boxing ring. Jack Johnson became the first black heavyweight champion. He also became the most hated man in America. Mario Diaz explains why.
Jack Johnson was one hell of a champion, one hell of a heavyweight champion.
Jack Johnson stood alone. He was Superman.
If you could think of Mike Tyson in his heyday, times 10.
He's a bad mother.
They couldn't beat him in the ring. He was a terrific fighter. He beat everybody that they put in front of him. So finally the government said, hey, we have to stop this guy, and this is how we'll do it.
What happened to Jack Johnson is so un-American.
The American tragedy known as Jack Johnson begins nearly 150 years ago in Galveston, Texas. Born to former slaves in 1878, the future champ laced up the gloves for his first fight at the age of 15. He's been fighting ever since.
He's being treated worse than your worst criminal because he cannot get a pardon in a country that is supposed to be blind when it comes to justice.
100 years ago, the world was not blind to Jack Johnson. He was 6'1" and all hurt. They say that the fear of man is another man's downfall. Well, they all fell before Johnson, and not by today's standards.
Fights back in the day, they did something. They towed the line. Explain that.
Well, you toe the line, that means that wherever you are, if it's a 45th round, you got to come up. Both fighters have to come up, they have to meet the line, and they have to be ready to fight. Now, for whatever reason, you're in your corner, and you can't make it to that line, and your opponent makes it to that line, he's the winner because you couldn't toe the line.
And Johnson had no issues making that line.
Never had any issues towing the line.
But whites did have issues with the world's first true superpower. This is what Johnson became on July 4th, 1910, when the corner of the Great White Hope, Jim Jeffries, threw in the towel after 15 savage rounds.
Wally, what was the crime committed here? Oh, the real crime was the fact that he beat a white heavyweight champion in Tommy Burns, and then he beat Jim Jeffries, a former white heavyweight champion. Jack London, a great novelist, and we all know who he is, he wrote Call of the Wild, actually wrote a newspaper story saying, Jim Jeffries, you must come off the farm and wipe the smile off this man's face. People couldn't stand the fact that this guy was physically superior to white boxers at the time. That's the real crime.
Society viewed him as a black sheep. Johnson viewed society as a corrupted flock. And the champ let them know it by dating white women, including white prostitutes. Ultimately, the man considered by some as the first civil rights leader of the 20th century had 2 white wives by his 35th birthday.
He wore their bigotry on his sleeve. He just poked his finger in their eyes.
In 1912, in the midst of his championship prime, the government stepped in with a conniving political TKO, the Mann Act, a new law aimed directly at Johnson that made it illegal to transport women across state lines for immoral purposes.
The whole thing with the Mann Act, that was aimed at a guy like Jack Johnson, a black man who wanted to be with white women.
And when you think about that, that's mind-boggling that someone would write federal legislation just for you.
The Mann Act was invented for Jack Johnson. It's really called the Jack Johnson Law, but they didn't want it to be so biased, so that's why they didn't call it that.
Johnson, who by now had deep ties to New York City, fled the country. In 1915, he lost his title to Jess Willard in Cuba. 5 years later, he returned. The U.S. welcomed him home with an 11-month stay at a federal penitentiary in Kansas.
Jack Johnson, man, he fought society on his terms, and he fought them by himself. He had no help.
Now, some 65 years after his death, in the political ring of D.C., 2 Republicans, Senator John McCain along with Congressman Peter King, are leading the fight for an icon they never knew. In their corner, Democratic Congressman Charles Rangel and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. All feel that the proper resolution to right this historical injustice is to honor Johnson with a full pardon.
For you, this is not
a civil rights issue. This is an issue about America.
This is an American issue. One, to show that America can correct what it's done wrong, and also to acknowledge what a great American Jack Johnson was.
There are many in the sport of boxing, as well as those who cover it, and the politicos in D.C. that will do anything to see Jack Johnson get a pardon. However, there is one man that has failed to take action: President Barack Obama, which is surprising to many because here's the first black heavyweight champion with an opportunity to get his name cleared by the first black president. But when the legislation for Johnson's pardon passed both houses in the last Congress, President Obama decided to kick it to the Department of Justice. Their response: we're not going to put manpower for the pardon of a dead person. However, if President Obama would like to do so, then he can pardon him. To this day, Johnson is still down for the count.
It's ironic and it's really disappointing. To me, it's such a golden opportunity for the president.
If there is a president that is uniquely qualified to deal with this issue, to issue the pardon, it's President Obama. It's a natural.
It's not for him. He won't know one pardon from another. And it's for America. This is a good, positive move. The president should really say, thank you for reminding me. End of story.
President Obama has pardoned 17 people since taking office, yet there appears to be no clear-cut policy by the president on pardons. The White House refused to comment on inquiries made by Pix 11. However, the Constitution states the president's authority to grant pardons is essentially unfettered, which means that the man who built his presidency on a foundation of hope and change is the only one that provides a dead man his greatest hope at changing history. For Jack Johnson, one final victory would arguably be his greatest. Mario Diaz, Pix 11 News.